I remember. It's as if someone finally turned on the lights. I remember Geekvolution, all those videos, my obsession with my work. I remember can after can of Mountain Dew. I remember taking my family for granted. I remember drinking so much soda I fell into a coma. And I remember what came after. I remember every day of Spawn Year, Doomsvince's ingenious master plan to destroy my sanity. I remember the compromises I made in my pathetic desperation, and above all, I remember Doomsvince, the real Doomsvince, and the reasons he hates me so. In the graveyard, I avoided any reference to our sordid history and Doomsvince's origin, out of fear of creating evidence that might incriminate me and others involved. I didn't know if I was in some elaborate optical illusion, and that when all was said and done, a stage crew wouldn't come in and strike the set around me. But I should have known better. This cannot be reality. My veins course with syrup, sugar, and carbonated water, which I need to function here. Be this my own fantasy or someone else's, no one from the world I once knew will ever read these words. And to clear my mind, to focus on where I was and where I must go from here, this is a story I need to put on paper. It was a year after Vince and I started the YouTube channel. Our audience was growing exponentially, and we were spreading ourselves too thin. It seemed we couldn't concoct a premise for a series our viewers wouldn't watch. Vince was becoming increasingly preoccupied with his other unrelated career goals, while I was becoming consumed by Geekvolution. It was my career and my life. But there was only so much content I could produce on my own, and it was impossible to keep up with every show we promised our devoted viewers. We needed help. Vince wanted to hire employees, but I had neither the funds nor the enthusiasm to bring in new blood. I didn't want another partner. I wanted Vince. There was no one more insightful, more talented, and no one I trusted more than Vince. I needed a way to allow him to be in two places at once, and then I had a radical, incredible, disturbing notion. Literally building a second Vince. It took some convincing, but Vince reluctantly agreed that a fully comprehensive cloned replica with all his personality and memories would solve all of our problems. We knew it was reckless and illegal, but we were both seduced by the romantic novelty of doing the unthinkable, something that, as far as we knew, had never been done before. Clones were always a terrible idea in the comic books, but we weren't the Jackal or Lex Luthor. Our intentions weren't to rule the world, just the harmless goal of continuing our video productions, a modest and minute ambition by comparison. It so happened I knew another YouTuber who dabbled in fringe science as a side hobby, though he revealed this to precious few. Dan Torrey had made great strides in genetic engineering, secretly toiling away under a microscope in his bedroom in his parents' house, testing the validity of far-fetched comic book and science fiction ideas, hoping to one day recreate the ooze from Ninja Turtles or resurrect a dinosaur, a la Jurassic Park. He wasn't mad so much as curious, and while his work had frightening implications, it also served my own comparatively less grandiose ambitions nicely. Dan was certain he could create a full-grown, artificially aged clone in under a month's time, complete with the full memory and psychology of the original. He never went into detail about the process. He was working outside of the accepted and permitted realms of research, and the less I knew, the better. I provided him with a DNA sample, and he got right to work. 5 weeks later, Vince 2.0 knocked at my door. I assume he took a plane and a taxi and was not delivered by US mail, but I was always leery of asking. He was remarkable. It really was Vince, with only minor differences, which I believed could be ironed out over time. He was cooperative, friendly, polite, and enthusiastic about the work we had created him for. He was also an unbelievable cook. But the problems came almost straight away. Vince 2.0 didn't sound like Vince. He enunciated every syllable and consonant so deliberately he sounded like he was teaching a remedial speaking course. He wasn't the slightest bit interested in popular culture. His tastes were more refined and he was quite condescending about them. When he filled in as Vince on Geeks Not Nerds, he wanted to discuss opera, ballet, and fine dining. Ultimately, I never published a single video we recorded together. I taught him to edit video, and he constantly changed our standard fonts, colors, logos, even music selections. He called them artistic improvements, and had no appreciation for the uniformed continuity Vince and I had established. He simply wasn't a good fit. He was abysmally incompetent at everything Vince was brilliant at. But I tried to make it work. What else could I do? He was my creation, my responsibility. But I could not hide my intense frustration and animosity toward him. One day, I had uttered one too many slights about his absurd accent, and he had had enough. He left that very night, and the next I saw him, he had transformed himself into Doomsvince, a supervillain whose sole purpose was exposing me for the arrogant, lowbrow, close-minded hack critic he thought I was. Neither of us wanted word to get out about his true origins. Me, because I didn't want to get arrested for crimes against nature, and Doomsvince, because he didn't want to wind up dissected like a frog in a laboratory somewhere. One of us, I forget which, came up with the ridiculous cover story that Doomsvince and I were roommates in college, and Doomsvince was jealous of my academic success and presumptuous self-titled moniker of Captain. We've both perpetuated that lie over the years. No one really believes it. What are the odds Vince and Doomsvince would be such closely resembled doppelgangers and have no connection to each other whatsoever? But it has never been openly questioned, because I would wager anyone wondering about it either assumes Vince has an identical twin he doesn't want to acknowledge, or else the whole thing is an elaborate running joke and Vince is indeed also Doomsvince. Believe me, life would be so much less complicated if that were true. And now, with my memory intact again, I look back on this year so far, and I realize that Doomsvince was right about me. I was arrogant and impatient. Doomsvince is essentially my firstborn, and when he didn't live up to my expectations and rebelled, I disowned him. I wished then I had never had Dan create him. I looked at him like a failed experiment. But if Doomsvince is responsible for all of this, he is not a failure. He is a genius, and I was a fool for not seeing it. And so I sit here now, slowly turning into Spawn. The comics continue to appear one by one, and I remain unburied. And that note, who else could have written it but Dan Torrey? Why would it have been camouflaged the way it was unless Dan himself wrote it? I still have many regrets about what I have done during Spawn year and what it says about me, and clearly many challenges ahead of me, but I choose to trust Dan's words. From now on, nothing, not Tiny Adam West or my addiction or hellfire and brimstone, will prevent me from seeing this through. I will accept the incarceration I have earned until I have done my time. I cannot be certain days have passed since I drank that 2-liter and wound up here, as opposed to weeks or months, but if I am right, this is day 212 of Spawn year. So today I return to the main title, and the first chapter of a new story entitled Cautionary Tales. It doesn't feel like it's starting a story arc, but more of a one-shot character piece about yet another single-appearance character running away from Spawn, with Spawn's new war with the Earth-walking devil with the Jason Wynn beard. Was that style just in right then? Looming in the background. Great. Is this arc going to be several more tedious, self-contained stories that do nothing to further Spawn's character progression, like a post-Bulgy Mortem version of Spawn the Undead? Angel Medina gets to draw several neat publicity poster-type shots of Spawn in dynamic poses, but he doesn't do anything except lurk ominously, so that Thea, a precog who sees people's future deaths and is thereby sometimes the unintentioned cause of them, will think he hates her because her cosmic awareness makes his existence irrelevant. The story is bookended with a scene of the devil cornering Thea and telling her she must make some choice, and most of the issue consists of flashbacks to flesh out Thea's character, motivations, and her superpower. I must admit that so little context is provided as to what Thea and the devil are talking about, and the flashbacks and exposition are presented in such a counterintuitive order, I had to read this one twice to make any sense of it at all. Hollywood makes some ineffective choices in what events we see and what events we are only told about. We see Thea predict an old lady's death at her mother's funeral, but without knowing she predicted her mother's death, it's hard to understand the significance of this, or to even be sure it's a true premonition. It isn't until 4 pages before the end that we learn why Thea blames herself for her mother's death. She predicted it, then warned her mother, and that warning distracted her long enough to get hit by a car in the middle of the street and fulfill the premonition. Oops. Why don't we experience that scene instead of watching her explain it to the devil in a hospital, who probably already knows it, especially since the whole comic is told non-linearly and we're already in a flashback as it is. Anyway, the point of this story is the devil's influential powers and ability to manipulate mortals. He convinces Thea that she herself is destined to die soon, or Spawn will catch her. He convinces her that Spawn is after her because her power somehow proves that there is no grand plan by God, no reason for living, and nothing in the afterlife for anyone but more pain. But her ability is predicting when people die, so I don't know why that means she has the cosmic awareness about the superfluity of human existence, but at any rate, she dies at the end, and it is left ambiguous as to whether she takes her own life or the devil kills her. And just before that, he reveals he tricked her and Spawn was actually coming to help her. Somehow. The devil ends the issue muttering the score to himself. "One love, Hellspawn, your move." I do like the tennis jargon word choice of love there, echoing his earlier hopeless speech to Thea that no one dies for anything, least of all love. The story itself is, as has been par for the course lately, confusing and nonsensical. What exactly takes Spawn so long to get to the girl and explain whatever his true intentions are? If he had just walked up and talked to her, none of the rest of this would happen. Why don't these stories ever explain how Spawn finds these sad sacks, and why does time seem to stand still so that Spawn is involved intimately in a single person's tragic story for days or months until it tragically ends? Or maybe Spawn organizes all the people he's stalking in a Rolodex, and he's intruding in all these people's affairs simultaneously. Ultimately, the details here don't matter. Spawn wants to help people, the devil wants to force him to take Bulgy's place, the end. This is the part where I'm supposed to say I'm sick of this stretched out, dull, aimless writing, and it makes me want to throw in the towel. But I've never been more certain I was finally doing the right thing than I am right now. I'm keeping my towel, and nothing can take it from me. Signed, Captain Logan.